Hello everybody, my name is Piroddi Corrado and I am a visiting researcher at Tampere University. Today I will present an excerpt of an article concerning Bourdieu's theory of domination that will be published on the Journal of Social Philosophy and Critical Theory, Constitutes. The first aim of my talk is to explain why Pierre Bourdieu critical sociology can be a precious contribution for those scholars who are interested in developing a descriptive perspective on the issue of social domination. In this regard, I will try to outline how Bourdieu's ideas can allow scholars to take into account the phenomenon of domination without employing the concept of ideology as an explanatory tool. In this regard, the second main objective of this talk is to sketch the general outline of an ontological account of domination that is sensitive toward the structural preconditions that empower or constrain the agency of social agents. First, I will introduce briefly some of the features that has been traditionally related to the concept of ideology. Then I will introduce some elements of Bourdieu's theory of social action and society. Finally, I will illustrate Bourdieu's structuralistic account of domination, highlighting the relevant ontological characteristics that can be important for developing a non-prescriptive account of domination. Along the history of philosophy, the problem of ideology has been always strongly connected to the question of social reproduction. Which are the mechanisms that guarantee the perpetuation and the existence of social practices, customs, and institutions? And if we focus on a Marxist tradition, how can we explain the fact that societies that are characterized by deep asymmetries of power, social status, and economic well-being are in any case capable of reproducing themselves? Especially for answering the last question, the concept of ideology has been widely employed in virtue of its explanatory power. In its various meanings, ideology has been considered first as an epistemic smokescreen, capable of hiding injustices and oppression from the eyes of oppressed people. Then, scholars have attributed to ideology the power of orienting agency of social actors in a practical way. Finally, the origin and efficacy of ideology has been linked to the idea that critical and reflective skills of human beings can be damaged or weakened. Before discussing the alternative account of domination provided by Bourdieu, it is necessary to introduce briefly some elements of Bourdieu's social theory and theory of social action. According to Bourdieu, social actions of human beings are deeply affected by the influence of structures such as the capitals, the social fields, and habitus. Capital and fields can be defined as objective structures of the first order. They determine the amount and kind of power agent can employ in specific social circumstances, the strategies that agent can actualize for increasing their material and symbolic resources, the relation of opposition and alliance that they can entertain among each other according to the position they occupy in a field. According to Bourdieu, there is a further structure that can be characterized as an objective structure of the second order, the habitus. Habitus is an embodied structure that constitutes a second nature for social agents. As a structuring structure, habitus is a system of dispositional properties that can produce social practices insofar as it embodies, on one end, perceptive schemes that allow social agents to see the practical opportunities inscribed in a social field. On the other hand, habitus dispositional properties can be realized only if the habitus itself embodied empirical expectation and normative hopes that are reasonable in the related field. When they satisfy this condition, practical disposition of the habitus work as a motivational, pre-reflective force that act below agent level of consciousness. However, according to Bourdieu, habitus is also a structured structure. As a structured structure, the habitus is constituted by an ensemble of beliefs, scheme of perception, and bodily skills that mirror the morphology of the social space in which the agents are acting. In this regard, habitus consents agent to act properly in an unintentional way, as it is produced by the social condition that constrain or empower social agents themselves. The social theory of Bourdieu is based on the assumption that society is a set of different fields that are characterized by different forms of capital stake, different practical logic of functioning, and different criteria of access. For instance, social agents who are competing for accumulating cultural capital in a cultural field will follow strategies of action that are not reducible to the practical logic that govern the economic sphere. The acquisition of academic degree or hard objects or books, for example, involves an investment of money and time that is hardly compatible with the logic of profit and productivity that characterize market of labor and commodities. In light of this consideration, it is, however, interesting to notice how Bourdieu nevertheless identifies an invariant structural feature which is present in every social field. Social fields are, in fact, if we follow Bourdieu, characterized by a constant struggle between dominant and dominated agents for the control of the capital and resources at stake in fields. In general, agents who occupies a dominant position in a field will tend to use their power and resources for preserving the status quo. Instead, dominated agents will tend to subvert the dominant relation of power in a field, trying to get a better social condition through their oppositional agency. Given this condition of perpetual struggle, how can we explain the process of reproduction of a society? Briefly put, for Bourdieu, it is fundamental to focus on the way objective and subjective structure, namely the capital, fields, and habitus, influence the relation of alliance and opposition that can occur among agents that belong to the same group or opposite fractions. The first step for understanding how Bourdieu's theory of domination works is to focus on the role of the subjective structure named habitus. According to Bourdieu, in fact, a powerful way of stabilizing the dynamics of interaction in a social field is related to the capacity of dominant agents of shaping, molding the practical predisposition of members of dominated groups through the exercise of symbolic power. Once they control media, propaganda, cultural industry, and educational system, dominant classes can induce dominated agents adopting practical attitude, scheme of perception, values, and even bodily skills that are consistent with the interest of the ruling class itself. It is worth noting that the production, the manipulation, and the acquisition of the habitus strongly differs from the development of ideological beliefs. First, following Bourdieu, symbolic violence is exercised over practical dispositions that are always enacted in a non-intentional way. So there is no involvement of conscious belief regarding the nature of the world. Second, the acquisition of a submissive habitus, of submissive predisposition, does not imply a weakening of agent critical skills. Dominated agents, in fact, can believe that their social condition is poor and unfair, and at the same time be unable to enact criticism and oppositional agency, either because they have learned to censor themselves or they lack the necessary vocabulary for expressing their suffering and discontent, or they do not know how to oppose and subvert their condition of oppression. Finally, the realization of behavioral patterns that are consistent with the ideas and interests of ruling class can generate forms of social recognition in a top-down direction that can be satisfying for dominated agents from an emotional and psychological perspective. The topic of social recognition allows us to better understand how, according to Bourdieu, social domination depends also on the specific morphology that social fields can assume as objective social structure. A ruling class is capable of monopolizing and employing effectively symbolic violence if and only if the same ruling class it is capable of monopolizing an immaterial form of capital that Bourdieu defined as symbolic capital. In brief, symbolic capital consists of the social recognition in the form of honor, social esteem, or respect that agents are able to attract and accumulate in the fields where they are active. Once they possess enough symbolic capital, agents can acquire the right of exercising symbolic power, establishing the rules, values, and access criteria that regulate the social practices at work in a given field. In the light of this consideration, it is therefore fundamental for dominated agents to preserve the possession of their symbolic capital and organizing the field in such a way that favor their position of power. In this respect, dominant agent can enact at least two different strategies for obtaining recognition from dominated and preventing at the same time their oppositional agency. Both strategies relies on a systematic weakening of the relation of mutualism and reciprocal recognition that can occur among dominated groups and individuals' agents. In the first case, dominant agents can promote values and practical logic that are desirable and attractive also for dominated agents. In this way, they can put at the same time dominated agent in a condition of reciprocal opposition. The logic of competition promoted in the labor market, for instance, favor dominated agent who occupies the dominant position, at least in two different ways. On one hand, it justifies the asymmetries of resources that characterize agents who occupies different positions in the field. On the other hand, the logic of competition pushes agent in a dominated condition to consider other dominated subjects as competitors, not as possible allies. The second strategy relies on the idea of selective exclusion. Dominated agent can weaken dominated ones, promoting access criteria to the field that tend to deprive some agents of the social recognition that is necessary to exercise a minimum of symbolic power inside the field itself. And this can happen even if the social agents who are excluded are taking part actively in the practices and activities of the social field. In conclusion, my thesis is that domination, according to Bourdieu, is a condition in which the morphology of social field allows dominant agents to accumulate and monopolize symbolic capital through balkanization of dominated social groups and selective social exclusion. And at the same time, it is a condition in which agent habitus embody values, scheme of perception, and criteria of judgment that preemptively critique and reduce the occasion of oppositional agency for dominated agents. In this regard, I think that Bourdieu critical sociology can help scholars interested in critical theory and social ontology into developing a conception of social domination that is, first, not normatively loaded. Second, that does not postulate any weakening of the critical skills of social agents for explaining situation of domination or oppression. And third, a theory that is sensitive to the structural elements that empower and constrain social action of social agents. Thank you for your time and attention. See you at the conference for your question. Goodbye.